Great. Okay. So welcome everybody again, and thank you so much. I know it's a small group so far. We probably will have more joining us. This is an information session about the DESTY Island Emotional Resilience Programme specifically, and just a little bit of background to it. And for those of you wondering if it's right for your school or if it's right for you as a potential DESTY mentor, this is just an opportunity to see what it's all about and to ask any questions that you might have. As you'll see, the title I've put in is Uprooting Generational Trauma, because as a company and as a team, our focus is always on how can we support the next generation, the current generation, to be even better than the last and to learn from their past experiences and to thrive even with the challenges they might be experiencing. My name is Stephanie O'Malley. So I trained as an educational psychologist. I qualified over 16 years ago. I've had a wide base of experience. I've worked a lot with children with intellectual disabilities and special additional needs. And my most recent post before I went full-time into DESTY was in our health service called the HSE here in Ireland. We're based here in Mayo in the west of Ireland. And there I worked with children with complex needs and life-limiting conditions. So an awful lot of my work. I also worked with young people, teenagers in care who were in short-term residential accommodation. So a lot of my work led me down the path of needing to understand trauma and the impact of trauma, either events that currently happened in a child's life or they were dealing with, like a life-limiting condition, or something that has happened cyclically. So looking at the residential centres and seeing where the parents of these young people had been in the same residential centres 15 years previous, 10, 15 years previous, probably 15, and where some of the young people in the centre were having babies, and the prediction from the staff who had been there for decades was that these children would probably be coming in through. And just the frustration really around that, number one, of why do we just accept that that's okay, that people can actually just, fulfill these prophecies, and nobody seems to think that we could actually get in there and do anything. But also, I suppose, as a clinician, as a practitioner, working within a clinical type setting where children were supposed to come into a complete stranger into a building, which at the time it was an old psychiatric hospital. So it'll tell you how warm and welcoming it was in our little cells that we worked from. But it was around really wanting to do more on a practical level to support the people who are there to support the child, and not work as a psychologist where children are kind of beamed in, you do a few sessions, you send them back out. So DESTY has been around for a long time in my thoughts and my vision, and then even in developing it and refining it to where it is today. If anybody's interested in the research that I've done, or my past experience or anything like that, please have a look at my LinkedIn profile. It's all there, and I'd love to connect with you. Also, by all means, give me an invite to connect with me as well. So as I've mentioned, I'm not going to go too far into this. It's something we cover as part of the mentor training, but a huge part of what we're trying to look at here is there a way we can affect the systems or support children so that the impact of the trauma or the challenges that have been experienced by past generations or in their direct experience can be impacted upon. One of the big things that I consider and we look at is the effect of the generational trauma and toxic stress. So again, I'm not going to go into too much, but trauma are the events that can happen to individuals or as a society. So I always talk about the last few years have been collectively as a generation and a population of a generation. We have all experienced a certain level, a high level of toxic stress and lots of trauma. And I don't think I've spoken to anybody in the last couple of years, 2-3 years, who haven't had some story around something pretty traumatic. The death of a loved one that they couldn't support directly, being in a hospital on your own and nobody being able to come and support you around that. So there's so many different examples we have. For young people, we know they were one of the hardest hit in terms of restrictions, the unpredictability, for some of them having no escape route in situations at home that were extremely challenging and not having any safe place to go to. So we've all got direct experience at this stage in a way that maybe 5 years ago, if we talked about this, we mightn't be able to connect as deeply. But it's something that we sometimes think about as, we think of certain socioeconomic groups and, oh yeah, it's the alcoholism, it's the domestic violence and all of that. But actually, this is something that's much more relevant. And even without COVID, I think if we all took an opportunity to reflect on different childhood experiences that happened, we can link some elements of our personality and how we behave and how we react to things that we've been taught or conditioned, or through experiences that we've had that have been challenging. So it's about the historical mistreatment and how these are passed down, how it leads to physical and mental and social and emotional challenges. And this is the key piece, I think, the next point about trauma can be genetic and cultural. And this is the whole piece about the nature and nurture and the exciting element of science that's now looking at the nurture side of things, the environment, the cultural impact, in addition to the genetical impact. But really, it's starting to unpack or unweave how they interact. It's not just nature, it's not just nurture, but at a very deep level, we can see how they both interact. So in terms of the impact of trauma, the research shows there's loads of different things that can affect how people respond or react. And a lot of twin studies have been done where identical twins have gone down different paths, maybe experienced similar life challenges or traumas, and where some seem to have managed to thrive and develop resilience and really exceed all expectations, and others go down a different road that leads them to sort of more difficult life experiences, such as addiction or, or abuse or whatever it might be. So again, not dwelling on this too much, I just want to kind of put it in the context of where DESTY Island comes from and why it's so important to us. The whole area of epigenetics is the name of the study of how the environment actually affects our DNA. So how we're affected at a cellular level as a consequence of the experiences that we have, either before we're born, so in utero, or when we're actually born. And the most exciting bit, and this is the cutting edge, leading edge piece of it, is looking at how the impact. So epigenetic looks at how the DNA is, parts of the DNA are switched on or switched off depending on the life experiences. So there may be a vulnerability to a certain thing, like say, for example, alcoholism. But the epigenetic looks at what are the environmental factors that switch that gene on or switches it off. And a lot of studies that have been done, as in lots of things, on mice and in rats and on from there, but really looking at how they can track the changes in DNA or the changes in the behavior of DNA based on the environment. And the really piece that I find very hopeful, it's a bit like when I think of, neuroscience, what we do know is that neural pathways can be changed. The brain is malleable. Some of our parts of our brain, the lower parts, are a bit more hardwired, so it can take a lot longer. But the higher parts that have been more, recently formed, are thinking brains, how malleable, how changeable they are, and how we can create new circuits and new networks. Well, epigenetics is giving us a similar message and saying that even if these genes have been switched on and the susceptibility or, the risk is there, environment can actually change the DNA and how the DNA behaves. So it gives huge hope for working with, especially with young people and children, to know that, it's not a case that from the wind they've caught it and that's it, that's their life and that's going to be their life story. We actually, those of us in the company or have the privilege to work with young people and children, have a huge opportunity to actually affect their lives in so many different ways. And what we know is that supportive relationships and rich learning experiences help with the positive epigenetic signatures that activate genetic potential. So all we're saying there is that if we can create an environment and conditions and the relationships with young people where they can actually feel safe and where they can start to learn and they don't feel the need to have these particular genes activated, that's a possibility. We can create those conditions and we can give them learning opportunities that completely change their pathways on every level of their being. So I've just put that graphic up for representation. I'm not going to claim I'm an expert in epigenetics. I'm not. I'm fascinated by it. There's loads of really helpful videos on YouTube and there's loads of really helpful studies on it, but it's definitely something that if you're interested in, it's worth looking at. Ultimately, how does DESTY Island work? It's one of the ways that we try and support children and the systems around children to uproot or break the cycle of generational trauma. And if you look at the kind of systems around the child, you can see there's loads of different layers. And it goes out as broad as the laws and the values and the customs and the culture that they're embedded within, depending on the country, the neighborhood, the environment that they're in. The next layer then is their extended family, their school community, their neighborhood. It's the things that have a direct impact on them, but it's later down the line typically. And then you see closest to the child is the direct relationships that they have. So their direct neighbors, the environment that they live in their neighborhood, their parents, their siblings, the early year settings that they have. And then right at the center, you have the child. So I love working at a systemic level and kind of trying to get through as many layers of that onion as we can. But I also recognize that it's really complex and really tricky. And sometimes we have to just start somewhere. So my vision with DESTY Island is we would start with the children, give them a playground or a place or a space where we could start to support them to look at who they are, how they feel, and how they can work with their feelings, in spite of how they've been role modeled to or taught or what they've been helped made to believe or they've come to believe. It's about how can we give them a blank canvas of space and that reflective space, even at a very early age, to consider who they are and how their feelings play out and what they can do in the moment to support them through it. And this is why we do what we do. So DESTY Island is the program that we've had running for the last number of years. We have DESTY goals for slightly older children, which I'm not talking about today, but we will be launching in the new year. And that's giving another opportunity for those who might be a little bit older than DESTY Island to, again, work off a blank canvas and see who could I potentially be and how can I work back from that with the support and the guidance of a supportive mentor. In terms of DESTY Island, the vision is that all children would access it. So my daughter, who's now 10, was one of the first candidates. She was 3 when we journeyed through the island together. My son is nearly 5, but he finished it this year, so he was journeying through it at the age of 4. I would love in an ideal world that all children have the opportunity to go through the curriculum that DESTY Island provides. And it's lovely to see more and more children accessing it. In the main, that's not feasible because of lots of constraints, budgets and times and personnel and all of that. So typically we do have to prioritise on the children. It's lovely to see we have some parents and foster carers using the programme, so we are reaching a wider base. But in the main, for most of you who are based in schools, you have to prioritise on where you have the most impact or where the highest need is. Typically, even in my post, when I worked in the health service, the children that I would wake up at 4 a.m. and wonder how are we going to take the next step with these children, how we could support these parents in schools, it was the children who were communicating their needs through the behaviour, who were saying, I'm not coping, I need some help. And the only way I can let you know that is when I flip my lid and I've lost it because I didn't have the language before I flipped my lid to tell you what I needed, or when I'm trying to escape from a situation, or when I just completely freeze. So these are the children who behaviourally are reaching out for connection in some way, but it can be very difficult to deal with. And children who are communicating that way can create a lot of stress, as I'm sure some of you have experienced. The phrases you tend to hear is, we're banging our head against the wall, we're at our wit's end, we're pulling our hair out, we've thrown the book at it. So it creates a lot of time and energy tends to go into trying to support these children, to keep them safe and help them to integrate and to learn. But it can just be really challenging. So when I used to do my on-site training, way pre-COVID, because we brought it online years ago because I wanted to scale it more quickly and it was the only way to do it. But when I have the privilege of being on site with mentors previously, they often came in with these children in mind because they were often the top priority. They're the children that commanded a lot of attention, understandably. But interestingly, the ones that I actually was more concerned about, even when it was in my past posts, were always the children who seemed fine. I spoke to a virtual school head, and a young person had said to him that fine meant feelings inside never expressed. These are these children who do not reach out through the behaviour, who are locking down and who are disengaging and we are losing, and unfortunately at an earlier and earlier stage. And these are the ones that we know the issues become more complex as they get older and the prognosis is not as good for them. These are the ones that just lock in and seem fine. And then you ask questions like, well, do they have one friend? Would they ever ask a question in a group? Would they ask for help? How do they get along with other adults in the school? And you start to ask just these very basic questions, and this is what happened in the on-site training. People were like, ooh, and by the end of the day, they said, I'm going out with completely different children in mind. And I'm still thinking of the ones I came in with, but oh my gosh, there is a group here that actually seem fine, that we need to start tapping into and see what's going on for them. And I see that more and more. We had our first DESTY Mentor training webinar last week, and we had quite a large group. And it was lovely when they talked about the children they had in mind. More and more, we're looking at these children and identifying these children who we also need to be very tuned in and aware of. And then there's a whole cohort of children that have had significant impacts. I think one of the biggest things I've heard, and particularly in the last 12 months or so, is, and there's a new phrase, I think it's a new phrase because I hadn't heard it for the last year, emotion-based school avoidance. And that's a big phrase. And what I like about, I don't love labels generally, but what I like about that label is that it's recognizing the emotional element to what is going on. So it's taken away from a behavioral perspective or an attention-seeking perspective, and it's recognizing there's something on an emotional level that is really catching this child and is contributing to their inability to attend school. So certainly this is a big area as well. You all know, because you're here wanting to know about DESTY Island and how hopefully it can be a tool that might help in your work and support your school and the work you're doing around wellbeing. The biggest impact is, be it through behaviour or children locking down or children not being able to get in the door, they're disengaging from learning. They're not able to be present and to learn because they're in their survival brains, which is the lower part of their brain, and they're not able to access their thinking brains. So we've, in terms of trying to support them educationally, we're kind of on the back foot because we don't even have them emotionally connected with us. That's one of the things. Obviously, if they're not engaged in learning or not coming to school, it's the educational outcomes. It's the level of stress and subsequent burnout of parents and carers, school staff, support staff. And it's so challenging. And I know I've spoken with foster carers where they are amazing and they have the best will in the world and they want to do all they can. But sometimes they get to a point where they just can't do anymore and they're devastated because they just can't support the child or children that they have. It means another transition for the children. It's horrific on so many levels. Same sometimes for schools. They just put their hands up and say, we just can't do anymore. We don't have the capacity and we can't do it. So that's what we don't want to see happening. That's one of the consequences that can be just so difficult to come back from. The breakdown of care placements and school exclusions. So as I mentioned, one of the things I thought was not particularly helpful when I worked in particularly the HSC and other posts was me as one individual working with the child, doing 6 or 8 sessions and, you know, providing guidance to school and parents, but ultimately not feeling I was having an impact. So for me, I felt it's much better if I can empower and support the people around the child to have the knowledge and skills and tools so the work can continue way beyond what I could offer. And anyway, I'm not somebody that's in the child's life day to day. And so it's about trying to identify somebody that would be connected with the child's life on a weekly or a daily basis and giving them the support and the tools that they need. And again, in the mentor group that we ran last week, you know, a lot of the mentors were saying we've tried so many things. So we're just looking for something that might connect or reach these young children because we just have run out of tools. And they like the idea of the DESTY character and the program itself being online as a different medium of accessing children. So that's one of the tools that happens. The phrase one good adult was coined a few years ago. There was a lot of research done around this, but the DESTY mentor role for me, I suppose it was the one good adult. And it came from looking at my own life story and the points of where I really struggled, and always there being somebody who got me over that bridge. And even if that person was only with me for a short while, and even if I didn't have that much contact, I could always think of people at different transition points that were really difficult, where there was somebody that kept me going. So in terms of developing DESTY, it was really important to me. This wasn't a tool that you sit a child in front of and say, yeah, just get on with that. I'll check in with you in 20 minutes. This was very much, as much, if not the most, about supporting a mentor to be a really solid role model and actually what we call a secondary attachment figure. And it's about providing that experience for children where a lot of them never had any experience of what a mentor can bring in terms of giving their full attention, really caring about that child, challenging them when they needed to be, having good boundaries, building that relationship over time. So a lot of work and time for the program has gone into the investment that we put into the mentors. I know that if we support and provide the right training and tools to the mentors, you do an incredible job. The stories we get back, the feedback we get back, blow our mind. And we're starting to build a page now of all the kind of different case studies and the champion skills that we have. But it's just what the mentors, not the program. The program is a really useful tool, but it's the mentors. So our primary role as a team is looking after you. Because again, listening to the mentors last week, just realizing what so many of you hold on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I was listening to the stories, and after the webinar, I needed to take a breather because I know you're listening to a lot in one go. But I said to them, this is what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Children who have lost a father a year ago and their mother 8 weeks ago, a child who has been moved 6 times in 2 years, and you're meeting these children day to day. And while you're all incredible and you see it as a vocation, so many people, I just want to provide some support to you as well. So that's what we try and do through the program. So the DESTY mentor is that safe, trusting relationship, that secondary attachment figure that's there for the child. If it might just be for the period of the program, it might be a term, whatever it might be. For some of you, you're involved with children over a number of years. So whatever period of time you learn through the training, you can have an impact. It can be the smallest thing that can actually have an impact. But the more time you have, the more you can develop that relationship. So we have a DESTY demo page that Saoirse will send on the link to everybody to educationdesty.com/demo. And what that will do is it will take you into each module of the island, so you can actually see the curriculum as it's laid out, how the child works through it with you, and all of the kind of features of it, including all the reports you can get, the SDQ, and also it'll show you a little bit about the training, how simple it is to engage with the training, and I'll tell you a bit about that as well. But just at the very top level overview of the program, it's very much based on the neuroscience of the brain, and it's very much based on that tree in brain that's developed by Paul MacLean, and lots of leading researchers like Bruce Perry and Dan Siegel and others have built on that foundation of Paul's research, and looking at how we can crudely break the brain up into 3 broad areas based on how it evolved since we were reptiles. So the first module about me is about setting up the space for the child where they get to know you a little bit and you get to know them a little bit. And the magic of DESTY, the character, is particularly for those children who have been let down and abused and neglected and traumatized by people in their lives that should have been there to nurture and support them, but for whatever reason couldn't be. So the DESTY character distracts the attention away from you as the mentor, which is so important and helpful for some children in particular. What's being said is that the character is so non-threatening. It's playful. So while you're sitting down, so 3 parts of the program is, one is that they have a workbook they do with you. You as the mentor guide them through it and you write in it. It just helps to prepare them for the island. So you'll see that when you're into it. But basically, you're working shoulder to shoulder with the child, and the focus is, we're going to share this with DESTY. So even for those children who find it difficult to work in pairs, you're getting them to a dynamic where they're working almost in a group of 3, because DESTY is the focus, and they're working and they're allowing you in shoulder to shoulder because they're excited and they want to work with DESTY. And the lovely thing about DESTY, they are doing some incredible work on an emotional level, but because it's so playful and because of the way it's designed, for them it's a break. They feel it's time out for them, and and they get this amazing time with a mentor who's really there to care and support them. So About Me is about them understanding themselves. They do their little avatar in the beginning that stamps their island. This is my space, belongs to me. Everything that goes into this island is for me. One of the things I want to mention at this point is I developed it with what's called universal design for learning. So I thought about the broadest range of possible children that I have ever worked with and that I have read about and that I understood, and tried to make it as accessible to all children as much as I could. Even children who have English as a second language. We have children who are refugee children using the program. We have children with mild intellectual disabilities using the program, autism, ADHD, quite a breadth. So it's not just children from any specific group. The real benefit of it is the visual aspect of it. So we know lots of children, they don't learn by listening. The auditory demand for some of them can be quite a lot. So they think in pictures and they prefer to communicate through pictures or drawings. So in the program, they can use gallery pictures, upload their own, they can draw within it. They can type or ask you to type for them if they want, but there's loads of different ways. And even the DESTY character, the language is very simple. So it does support the receptive language, but also because everything is done in a very kind of structured, simple way, the language part of it doesn't get in the way. DESTY also talks in a rhyme. And again, there has, to every single dot and cross that you see in this program, it has been thought through to the nth degree. And so the rhyme from DESTY is because we know, nursery rhymes for my kids from when they were in my womb is what I would do with them, because nursery rhymes are so calming, rhythmical. There's something about them. So I worked really hard. Some of the rhyme is a little bit poor, and you have to give me some creative license for it. I've done my best. I've stretched a couple of syllables the odd time, but there's a real purpose to how DESTY speaks in a very kind of a lulling, gentle way, and that helps to just calm the child's nervous system. Second module, My Feelings Tower, is all about developing their emotional vocabulary and their emotional literacy. And at this point, there's no argument around the impact of the breadth of a child's emotional vocabulary and how that supports them in regulating their emotions and therefore their behaviours. So one of the main bodies is called the Centre for Academic, CASEL, the Centre for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning. And they've done meta-analysis of tens of thousands of students and, loads of studies on this. And what they know is that when we have more words for feelings, then we can label it correctly and respond correctly. And it's all to Dan Siegel's, we did this in our training. Dan Siegel calls it, name it to tame it. And it's the whole idea around how we can prevent that flipping of the lid if we get the right emotion labeled. Most children go from happy or okay to angry or maybe sad, but there's maybe 3 emotions, stretching the odd time 4. When they're able to say, I'm disappointed, I'm frustrated, I'm excited. So in the program, we focus, it's a bit like driving a car. You're kind of focusing on up and down the road and doing one route until you've got the gears, you've got the mirror, you've got everything in place. So we take 6 core feelings, which are the ones that are termed to be, Ekman, did the research on this to say these are the universal across cultures, across languages. So we took those 6 and we develop a framework for those 6. In your DESTY feeling cards, and you have to forgive me, I put a big light here so that I would look brighter, but I've covered over my resources, but you'll see them in the picture. In the DESTY feeling cards that you get in your DESTY kit, there are 26 feelings. And the feeling cards on their own are absolute magic. And even for children, before you start getting them to the island, I always suggest you start playing with the cards first of all. There's 4 or 5 games in the card deck, but then children come up with their own, and we've developed a DESTY feelings bingo worksheet for it as well, so you can extend as much as you want. But those feelings, like, I'm so passionate, I believe children, when they're in early years, even pre-early years, my 2-year-old was able to come in and tell me he was scared of something that was on in the living room. I believe they should have emotional vocabulary, and that should be the focus in the very, very early years. As a baby, oh, you're hungry, you're sad, you're hungry. Naturally, we tend to label and name from when they are born. And even, if they're moving around a lot, we might talk to them before they're even born. But that's the idea. But we should, my belief is that this is where the focus needs to be, especially in the early years, before any of the phonics or any of the letter learning comes in, the emotional vocabulary. When we have the words for feelings, then we can start to put them together in a context and develop the literacy skills. So have a meaning around them and be able to communicate them more clearly. So the whole idea of the Feelings Tower is developing those key skills. How does a feeling arise in me? How do I notice it in somebody else? So it's all very personalized. The whole program is tailored and personalized. What thoughts arise, and where do I sense it? Where do I sense it? What thoughts arise, and when do these tend to arise? So it's getting them to step back and look at these feelings for themselves, not when somebody else says they get angry, not when somebody else says they're sad. When do I feel this? And because you as the mentor have gone through the journey, as part of your training, you go through this island and you reflect on these questions. So you've got that experience of what it's like and how tricky some of these questions can be. And you can share that with them as well. These aren't always easy questions. And sometimes, while the program is quite structured in that you've got a very specific curriculum, there's huge flexibility within it. Again, I emphasize this in the training. You can go forward if they want to skip a feeling, they're not ready. Sometimes children don't want to do sad. We had a really sad case, one of our mentors who said, I'm sure you put happy in first because you thought that'd be an easy one to start with, which was my thinking. And she said, my child does not want to talk about happy. She just wants to talk about sad right now. And that is sad, but at least she has that opportunity and space to do that. So if they're not ready for emotion, it's about really tuning into them and seeing where they're at, when they want to move on, when they want to come back. The lovely thing about each of the modules is they're crafting a little life storybook as they go along. They don't know it until the end of the first module. I worked in a very disadvantaged secondary school in Dublin, and if they heard work or writing or taking stuff out in terms of pens, they'd just down tools. I'm not doing work, not writing anything. So I found tricks of getting them to do things when they didn't realise they were doing maths. So we'd take out string and we'd measure it just for the fun. And then I'd say, write down the numbers that we wrote here. And they'd be like, I'm not doing any work. I'm like, you've done the work. We were just recording it now. And they'd be delighted with themselves. So the idea of that is that they go through about me. And at the end, DESTY says, and look what you have done. You've created the first chapter in your life story. And the lovely thing is it pops into their treasure chest. And at any point in time, they can go back in, change it, add to it, take it out. So it's a living live document that works with them. It's a really useful document for PEP meetings or IEP meetings or any meetings where either they want to be there and they want to present, or they want you to present, or they don't feel they can be there, but they trust you to maybe share some of the information. Also really useful if they have to move placement or move schools, that there is something about them, from them, that can be shared, and they don't have to start all this information straight away again. There's little superpowers at the end of each module and a certificate, and the children absolutely love the certificates. And even at Halloween and Easter and Christmas, we have little challenges like colour in the bauble, and DESTY sends them another certificate at these times of the year. And for some children, they're not the typical candidates for lining up first for a certificate for lots of things. So it means so much to them. And the third place then is the workshop. So now that I have you feeling safe, we've developed a relationship, now that we've built your vocabulary and your emotional literacy skills, so we can have some language to talk about what's going on, now I can start to think about what can I do when different feelings arise. There are so many incredible programs out there, really well researched and evidence-based, and work really well. But there are some that I find try and start at the top level, try and teach the strategies before they've got the foundations in place. If they don't feel safe and don't know how to understand and recognize their feelings, you can teach them all the mindfulness in the world. It will work really well for some children. For others, it will never come to mind when they need it. You know, the breathing, it'll never come to mind because they haven't got the understanding behind it. So the idea of the resilience workshop is that they have a menu of things that DESTY suggests, that DESTY finds useful. So there is belly breathing, sometimes colouring, going for a walk, mindfulness, the superpower. It's a very short one for children. But also children have the opportunity to think, well, when was the last time you were really angry? What helped? I was talking this morning at a webinar or last night, about a child who wouldn't get out of the car at school, was hugely anxious. And when I asked him, what would help you? He said, I like to listen to the radio for a few minutes, because what was happening is school staff were coming out, his peers were coming out. It was just petrol on the fire all the way. And all he wanted was to sit there for a few minutes, gather himself, tune into the radio for a couple of minutes, calm himself, and come in when he was ready. And he was able to say that. So that's an opportunity for them to put their own thing in. Their action plan is specific to them and what works for them. We're starting to get our data back on the SDQ. So in January, the January prior to when COVID hit, whatever these years are now, we had just worked with Goodman, who developed, is Goodman's team, I should say, who has developed the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. We worked with his team to integrate it in. He said we're the first organisation that he's known of that actually worked with them to put it in. And it's very helpful because it means you can do the SDQ in about 5 minutes. You literally tick the boxes, or if you need somebody else to fill out the questionnaire because you don't know the child, you're literally doing it. It generates the pre-score. When you get through the last module, it generates the post-score and it gives you an impact report. So there's really good, sophisticated reporting that tells you how long you spent in the program, how long, how many inputs they've had, and then the impact on that level. So we're starting to get that data back now, because you know yourselves, it was stop, start, they were in, they weren't. So it's only now we're really starting to kind of see the pre and post coming through, but we're seeing some really, really significant scores on children. And when we follow up with mentors, they're backing that up by saying, yes, there is a considerable change. We have, case study from one child, she had to leave the school, but the difference they made, not just DESTY, the nurture group she was in, the whole environment, of course, but she talked about DESTY a lot, and she had to leave the foster carers. They made a DESTY cake, but the foster carers commented on how transformative it seemed to be for her. She had the teddy and she had to move schools. She had the teddy in her hand going into her new school on the first day. So, we've got this, the qualitative data I'm usually more interested in, but it's really useful to have the quantitative stuff to see where the scores are at as well. We did a pilot in Ireland last year with school completion officers. So they work a little differently. They work with clusters of schools. So they might have 5 or 6 schools that they travel around to. And initially I was resistant because I liked the idea of the mentor being in the school and seeing the child in the playground. And they'd always tell us, they'd come up and say, when is my next DESTY session? Or they might mention something that they learned. So it's lovely to have that presence during the week. But actually, we piloted this and it went really, really well, where somebody was able to come in and give that dedicated time to the children. So we were seeing things like they were saying they were more willing to come into school, they were more regulated, they just seemed calmer. But the biggest one that came out, it's on the bottom, should be on the top, was the change in their self-confidence and self-esteem. And it's not something I had expected in a way. I don't know why, it just wasn't on my radar. But I just think if you take everything else off that list and just leave that one on it, my work is done. Because if you can develop somebody's self-confidence and how they feel about themselves, they can do anything. They believe in themselves and believe they're worthy and lovable and capable. Sky is the limit. So that, for me, to hear that DESTY is giving them, and of course they're getting this dedicated time from somebody who thinks who believes they're important and worthy, and they feel taken care of, they feel cared for. They're all the conditions that we need. And they've got DESTY who loves every single child. DESTY has a little Christmas message for them all now, telling them that, DESTY will be thinking about them. It's not a boy or girl. That's why I move away from he or she. When I grew up in Ireland, we had a Bosco. It wasn't a boy or girl, it was a puppet. And I loved Bosco. And I love that idea of just Bosco being a Bosco. So DESTY is just a DESTY. But it's that sense of actually having all of the conditions in place that the DESTY Island programme helps to facilitate, along with the actual curriculum as well. So I'll leave this up there so you can see how it works. I want to talk a little bit about the training for a minute. So we're constantly reviewing and refining our offering. So I used to travel around Ireland and the UK before my 3 children and deliver on site, and I loved it. And when they get a little bit older, I'll be back on the road as much as I can again. But then it became too restrictive. So I used to run just live webinars. It became restrictive, but also people told me it's a lot of information to take on in a day or two. And like, I've had amazing training. I've been so lucky in different parts of my job. And you're all enthusiastic the day after it, or the day of it, or the day after it. And the following week, if somebody asked you to list 5 things that you did in your training course, it's so challenging because there's only so much we can retain in a space of time. So that's why I broke up all of the training into bite-sized videos, most of them between 5 and 7 minutes. The longest might be 20 minutes, with the view that, and again, I put my heart and soul into the training. Every lesson has a particular learning point that I want to get across. And so the beauty of this is that everybody learns at different paces. So some people are, with the self-paced piece of it, they listen to it like a podcast. You don't have to watch me. I mean, the video is there to make it a bit more interactive. Some people will have it in the car. I had one lady who said when she was so sorry to finish her training, because she loved sitting down with me in the evenings while her husband watched the footing, and she'd sit with me and we'd talk about and I love that idea, because I had to ring her one day. She's like, oh, it's great to be on the phone with you because I've been with you for the last few weeks. So when I did the training, I was talking to you and engaging you and trying to get across the things that I felt would really benefit you in your role. So even though it is recorded and self-paced, I do my best to bring myself into it. And, we get lovely feedback about that. So I feel I've done okay on that. So you do the self-paced, and that's the equivalent of 2 days on-site learning, but you can do it in your own time. For mentors who are keen to get going and they have the support from their senior management, their head teacher, whoever it might be, they can be given extra time. So we have had mentors who will do that training in a couple of weeks or 2 or 3 weeks, or I had one who committed herself to a weekend and did it over the weekend and did it really, really well. So it's flexible. But you'd need to be giving yourself on average an hour and a half per week over 8 weeks to get it done within that schedule. One slide I forgot, Saoirse, you might have a look for it, you might be able to share it, is the schedule for January, or the 3 schedules, whatever you think. So what we weaved in, because people were starting it every other day, and I wasn't able to look after people in the way that I wanted to. So last year we piloted that we actually brought groups together as a cohort, so myself and Saoirse could take care of you and check in with you and know where you're at. And part of that was weaving in 3 live workshops, 1 hour each, one at the start of the schedule, one at the middle, and one at the end. We bring in an existing mentor in to talk to you about how they're using it and answer questions. But it's really to reinforce the learning and just to check in with you and answer questions. They are obligatory because we found the impact of the live webinars really, really big. So it's a requirement. So you do the 8 hours in your own time, and then you do the live webinars. If you finish the training early, you're still asked to attend the webinars, but you can actually start the DESTY Island program whenever you want once you've finished your training. I hope that makes sense. Thanks, Saoirse, that's great. So we will send the schedules on for people. So the next group, we have a group just started now, and they'll be finishing in January, and our next group will be starting on the last week of January for the new year. So we will send these on, and then Saoirse, you can scroll down if the other groups are there. Then our next intake will be in March. We will send these on, all of these dates. So you have the dates and you know the hours. We have a morning webinar session and an afternoon, depending on what suits. And our last one for this year will be in the late April, early May. So they're the schedules. Thanks, Saoirse. I'll go back to mine. No, move past. You can see that. No, I'm sure there's a quicker way of doing this, but I'm nearly there anyway. So the training, as I said, the full package includes all of the training support that you get all year. When you finish your training, you come into our academy and our certified network, and we have 17 additional CPD courses that you can do yourself, or you can do as part of a staff training day, or you can share. And they're topics like children and grief, bullying, self-esteem, or friendship skills. We've loads of different short courses that are there for you to complete to add to your bank of knowledge. We do regular mentor CPD, so I'll be doing one in January on intergenerational trauma. So we will be looking at that a little bit more, and all the things we can do to support children with that. So basically everything is included, and you get 5 passes initially for DESTY Island, so you can start working with 5 children straight away. However, you can also, if you finish, one of the big questions is how long does it take to use a DESTY Island? And please be typing in questions if they come to mind, or unplug your microphone, but not unplug, but switch it on. The program is child-centered and child-paced, so there's no real measure for how long it will take children to go through it. For children that have something that's not as complex, like they might have a parental separation and they need support for a period of time, or there might have been a bereavement, but generally it's not a complex situation. Some of these children can go through the island in a term. The minimum you need to set aside is 15 sessions. In general, 35 to 40 minutes, no more than 40 minutes. For younger children or children with attention difficulties or children, more significant needs, it might be 20 or 25 minutes. But we do ask a minimum once a week for an average of 35 to 40 minutes. Some children, because they're really not coping with the curriculum net and they're not able to be in school, they will do DESTY 2 or 3 times in the week because that's what's connecting with them and that's what they need. So again, I'm very flexible. I trust you and your knowledge of your school and the children to know what they need. I don't like to see children running through the program too quickly, because you can't really embed the information and give them time to reflect on it fully if you just fly through it. So it is about giving them that space and making sure you dedicate that time. We have children, and particularly children who have been in care or are in care, who may want to go back to it 2 years later. They're constantly revising their workbook. They need that space. They're learning. They've more that they want to say. So you can reset it up to once in a year. So if you have children that get through it in a term, or in half of an academic year, you have the option to reset it once in the year, and that's included. So potentially you can reset each pass once, so you've got 10 passes. So the minimum is 5 children, and then you can work with up to 5 to 10. We have a school that has over 30 children. There's 2 colleagues, and that's their job pretty much. And so if you have more needs or more children, you will find in the training, you probably will have more children coming to light. It's £70 per pass. And that's again for up to 2 children. And if you buy more than 5, we do discounts. We don't, everything I try and do is pretty much a cost, as long as we cover our day-to-day and everybody gets paid. We probably should have set up as a charity, as I said, but anyway, we are a social enterprise, so we try and make it as accessible as we can. We're mindful of budgets and all of that, but we need to sustain as well. So we do try and keep everything. I've also recently, we used to just add in a starter kit with the Teddy 1 workbook and feeling cards, so you could use a downloadable or photocopy book and just have the 1 hard copy. But I just started giving out 5 books because I want every single child to have their own workbook, because I've learned how important they are for the children. I'd love every child to have a Teddy, but it's not feasible at the moment. So you as a mentor get the Teddy. Sometimes you decide there's a particular child that will need it, or whatever. You can buy them separately if you need to, but you have it as part of your kit. They have a lovely little zip in the back with their wishes and their worries. And you get your set of feeling cards as well. Part of our support package, so the ongoing webinars we do, our live chat are there. We respond usually within an hour or 2. Our emails, we have a phone number. So we've all these methods to just ping us or get in touch. Saoirse is our go-to, and she's incredible at taking care of people and resolving things for people. There's nothing we can't help with. There's nothing we can't resolve. But we also have this lovely community board, which you have as part of your DESTY Mentor training. And then once you're trained and certified, you go into the wider network, and we share resources, we have discussions. These can be tricky to get going because people don't have a lot of time, and there's no demand or expectation that you have to, but it can be a really good source of knowledge. If you want to know something wider than, if you want to know if somebody's worked with a child with a particular challenge, or you're stuck, or whatever it might be. Also, there's the option on your dashboard once you're trained to book a call with me for up to 20 minutes if you need to brainstorm, or you're just getting a bit stuck and you're not sure if a child should continue, or whatever it might be. I, as much as possible, make myself available to mentors to be that sounding board, because that's important to me. On a monthly basis or regular basis, we're developing new resources and new packs. All of the additional resources that we develop, I love you to share with your whole school, any teacher, any resource teacher, anybody else that you think might find it useful. So we've just given out the Christmas resource pack. Some of the mentors will post them to the kids during the holidays. Some of them will do them in the lead up to the holidays. We've got different games that we provide and all of that. So we're always looking for ideas from our mentors as well. The reason we came up with the feelings bingo sheets is one of our mentors had a version of something. She said they're just not very engaging in the pictures and all of that. Could you do something? So that's how that came out. And the great thing is, even though you might be working one-on-one with a child on the island, because that's the way it's designed, I've tried to do it in groups, it just dilutes it too much. So it just doesn't work. It needs that individual with the island. However, the feeling cards, the bingo games, all of those things you can use at a group level or a peer level. And as I said, you can disseminate that throughout the school. We love to know that, you know, DESTY's getting a further reach than just the one-on-one for children as well. I've talked incessantly for 50 minutes, apologies. So I'm going to breathe and take a sip of my tea. Any questions, comments, anything I haven't covered that people would like to know, yeah, let me know. You can either put in the chat or just switch off your microphone. It's a small group. So it would be good to see if there's any questions. Have I covered everything? We will send on a copy of the slides. The next schedule, if people want to sign up, we'll send them a link for how to register their organisation if they want to sign up for the next cohort, and a link to the demo page as well. Wonderful to have you all here, and thanks for taking your time out this afternoon to be here. And email training@educationdesty.com with anything that you need, or give us a buzz, and we'll be there. Saoirse will be there, I'll be there, we'll respond. Thank you so much for your time, everybody, and we'll send out that information in the morning, and have a lovely evening.